I got nothing but air in me, nothing but air in me. But I can make you lose just twice as much weight as a regular donut hole can. Now I'm a little cookie, yes I am, as made by the cookie man. On the way to the cookie pan, a little piece broke off of me. Now I ain't as round as I can be, but I'll taste good, just wait and see. And I can love back just twice as hard as a regular cookie can. As you walk the streets, you'll have no hairs if you walk the lines and not the squares. As you go through life, make this your goal. Watch the donut, not the hole. Yeah.
Yay!
Woohoo!
Thank you.
Thank you, David Rogers.
Thank you, David Rogers.
Welcome everybody to the Invisible Disabilities webinar.
Welcome everybody to the Invisible Disabilities webinar.
This is the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene community.
This is from the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene community.
And I'm the chair of the Accessibility Task Force.
And I'm the chair of the Accessibility Task Force.
Rev. Jen, our minister, will join us later.
Rev. Jen, our minister, will join us later.
But first, in our tradition, we begin with a chalice lighting.
But first, in our tradition, we begin with a chalice lighting.
And this is a quote from Helen Keller.
And this is a quote from Helen Keller.
I am conscious
I am conscious
of a soul sense
of a soul sense
that lifts me
that lifts me
above the narrow, cramping circumstances
above the narrow, cramping circumstances
of my life.
of my life.
My physical limitations
My physical limitations
are forgotten.
are forgotten.
My world lies upward.
My world lies upward.
The length and the breadth and the sweep of the heavens are mine.
The length and the breadth and the sweep of the heavens are mine.
And my wonderful wife, Deborah, lifted the chalice for us.
And my wonderful wife, Deborah, lit the chalice for us.
Repeating me is the man Ian.
Repeating me is the amazing Ian.
Thank you, Patrick, for doing our ASL.
Thank you, Patrick, for doing our ASL.
And we also have Andrew and Stephen.
And we also, Andrew.
Michael and Andrew.
And,
Michael.
well, we also here have Michael and Stephen.
Michael and Stephen. I just am human.
Michael and Stephen, and I guess I'm human.
And Kat is so big tech.
And Kat is helping on tech.
Everyone is welcome.
Everyone is welcome.
And so Ian, can you bring me back upper left?
Upper left?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
I'd like to introduce you, Reverend Fast.
I'd like to introduce you to the Reverend Suzanne Fast.
The Reverend Suzanne Fast.
The Reverend Suzanne Fast.
She, her,
She/her pronouns.
is a Unitarian Universalist community minister.
Is a Unitarian Universalist community minister.
Focusing on disability justice,
Focusing on disability justice,
advocacy,
advocacy,
education,
education,
and pastoral ministry.
and pastoral ministry.
Primarily through EqUUal Association Equal Access.
primarily through the UU Association's Equal Access.
I'd like to add a personal.
And I'd like to add a personal note.
I have had the privilege of being in several small groups
I have had the privilege of being in several small groups
of other UUs with disabilities,
of other UUs with disabilities.
and Rev Suzanne
And Rev Suzanne
has always been supportive and inclusive,
has always been supportive and inclusive,
warm, and identify as having lived experience.
warm, and identifying as having lived experience.
When he tries for us to discuss invisible disabilities.
What a treasure for us to be able to discuss invisible disabilities.
So from Florida, Reverend Suzanne Fast.
So from Florida, Reverend Suzanne Fast.
Y'all, and thank you, David. Thank you, all of y'all, for making this possible. This is wonderful. It's such a joy and an honor to be here with you. So I'm not sure exactly how we want to go about this, but you know, we're a small group, and we can figure out how to share, because what I don't want to do is give you a lecture about things that you're not interested in. So let's not do that. As David said, my ministry is primarily focused on disability justice and education, advocacy work. I've been doing that for more than 10 years now. But it has been a super joy for me to be doing a lot more now with our own community of disabled UUs. And it's been a wonderful change in what I do, and just an amazing opportunity to really focus on what all of the things that I've been working on to get non-disabled UUs to think about and understand what ableism is, and to know it when they find it, and all of that work. It means a whole lot more when we also get an opportunity to be together, even though we may be hundreds or thousands of miles apart. It's one of the beauties of the new technology that's brought us all together. And just to put my other bona fides right on the table, I do have both physical, visible disabilities, and that's what people think of sometimes. They've seen me dashing around General Assembly in my scooter or whatever. But actually, I have a chronic illness I've had for 30 years now. That's not visible, and affects my life, frankly, far more than the fact that I can't climb steps or stand still in a pulpit. And then I'm also neurodivergent. So again, that's another kind of invisible disability. And when you really stop and pause and think about the reality, there's so many people with so many invisible disabilities. There's so many kinds of invisible disability. And society likes to overlook them and pretend they're not there, and focus on things that have very obvious, well, you know, let's put a ramp here, and then, you know, Suzanne can get onto the chancel. Let's put a ramp here so that everybody can come into church and move around in coffee time and actually use the restroom when they need to. We focus on those things. We focus on the hearing loops, because so many of us benefit from them, and it's concrete, it's tangible, you can put it in the budget. But there's so many of us with chronic illnesses, so many of us who are neurodivergent, so many of us who have mental health issue of various sorts. And it's all complicated, there's so much. And, there are some ways, we don't like to think it too much, but there are a lot of ways where Unitarian Universalists are really a whole lot like everybody else. I mean, there are ways we're not, but there are ways that we are. And the fact that we're acculturated in this society is part of that. And so people don't know what they don't know, right? And most of us like to think that we know the lay of the land. We know how things work. And so much of what we're faced with in interaction and in the way we talk and think with each other is really based on a narrow set of norms. And I don't know about you, but it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I am not especially nervous if I don't know the answer or I don't do something right. But I've cultivated that, it's a good professional skill for me, but it's also part of some of the soul work and the growth work, right, that our faith asks us to do, is to get more comfortable with the idea that we're just people and we're not perfect and we don't know everything. And I think that's kind of been the pinch point lately around people suddenly becoming more free of talking about our invisible disabilities, and people in the society becoming more cognizant, more accepting of the idea that there's a lot going on in people's lives that they don't know about. But I think sometimes when we run into feeling not particularly at ease in our congregations, it's because we don't know the right thing to say, and we worry about saying the wrong thing. Or we don't even think about the idea that maybe somebody has invisible disabilities, and maybe that's why they always say no when you ask them to do this thing, because it's not something that's going to be comfortable for them, even though it's comfortable for me. There's just so many pieces where this comes into play just in our church communities. And so, David, when you gave the invitation to talk about invisible disabilities, my feeling was there's so much, it's so rich. Our lives are amazing. And we all benefit from when we get to be who we are in a place like church. And so I'm really happy to be here. I will talk about things that, I know. I can talk about things about equal access. I can talk about, the work that's happening in Unitarian Universalism. But the reality is what's important is what's happening here in this community of almost 40 people who've gathered today. And so I'm going to pause, and I'm hoping that you will steer us for where we're going to go next.
Well, thank you, Reverend Suzanne.
Well, thank you, Reverend Suzanne.
Before we go further, I wanted to ask one first question.
So before we go further, I wanted to ask one first question.
This is Memorial Day weekend,
So of course, this is Memorial Day weekend.
and many veterans and civilians are caught up in war
And many veterans and civilians have been caught up in war,
such as those in the Ukraine,
such as those in Ukraine.
and I would add, caught up by shootings in schools and in everyday life.
And I would add that people caught up in school shootings. And I missed the last one.
It's making our neighborhoods war places.
It's making our neighborhoods war places.
Anyway, I have PTSD.
Anyway, I have PTSD.
So sometimes this is visible,
So sometimes this is visible,
but sometimes it's invisible.
but sometimes it's invisible.
How would this differ for you, for instance, when it's visible or invisible?
How would this differ for you, for instance, when it's visible or when it's invisible?
It's real to us.
It's real to us.
It's a discrimination.
Is it discrimination?
Well, there's certainly opportunity for there to be discrimination when people don't give consideration to the fact that we don't all have the same experiences, and when we sort of want to gloss over people's experiences or not hear them or not acknowledge them, that's a form of ableism. When we want to not make the kind of space that people need in order to be able to participate, that's discrimination. So, for example, for people who live with the after effects of trauma, there's so much that can bring those things up. I experienced that myself. I have a trauma history of my own, and sometimes I need space. Sometimes I need somebody who I know I trust to be there, or sometimes I know that I'm not the best person to talk about X, Y, or Z, and I will arrange for somebody else to carry that conversation because I know it'll be hard for me to be present because it's work. It's hard work when your trauma is being poked at. It's hard work to stay balanced and to stay in the conversation with other people and facilitate things and all of those sorts of things. And so one of the things that we need to be able to do is to accommodate for those sorts of things. For people who personally carry the ravages of war, that's a thing that I have no personal experience of, but I see the weight of that in people. And our society isn't always very charitable about that. And we don't always give people the space to distance when they need to distance, but also to not feel like they're abandoned in the process. And that's work that we can learn to pay attention. And we can learn to just accept other people in the way that they need. You know, people shouldn't have to spill their trauma all over the table for us to listen when they say, yeah, no, I can't do that. We shouldn't need to have a big explanation from people. We can be supportive when that's wanted, but we're not entitled to somebody's story. And finding that balance, that's tricky.
Oh, yeah, I like the idea. We need social justice, whether or not our disabilities are visible.
I like the idea that we need social justice, whether or not our disabilities are
That's
visible,
irrelevant, really.
because that's irrelevant, really.
Mr. Michael Young had a question for us, and this wonderful repeated.
Mr. Michael Young had a question for us, and his father will repeat.
What are some good ways that we can include someone with an invisible disability?
What are some good ways that we can include someone with an invisible disability?
Actually, show you to the camera.
Oh yeah, and we can show any questions if we want to bring that to the camera.
And could do
Yeah, okay, I got you.
That's fine.
Oh yeah, the camera's auto adjusted.
That's a superb question there.
That is a superb question there.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's a funny thing for congregations, right? Because we want to be inclusive in some sort of abstract kind of thought, but part of it is everybody's disability is different. And so what really makes the changes happen is cultivating that feeling of everybody belongs here. In the sense of anybody, whatever body, whatever mind, that's not a reason we want people to not be here. You know, I mean, we've all got, every congregation has, you know, theological things and other things that we kind of coalesce around. But how do we bring that from this abstract idea, right, into how we really are together? And part of that is how do we make it feel like it is actually really okay to say, I don't like to be touched? How do we make it really safe to say, how can we figure out a way so that I'm not getting sensory overload from what's happening in worship? Can we think together about how to make something happen so that I get a good worship experience and it just becomes a part of the way we do things? And it's hard to convey that because I don't know if you've had the experience, I have occasionally, of people want so much to help that they just overwhelm you when you come in the door. And like, gee, I was really here to just sort of sit in the back and check this place out and see whether I want to get to know you all that much. And so it's hard to find the sweet spot, the balance point between that kind of aggressive eagerness and the kind of, no, really, we want to know what we can do that will make our place a place you want to come and come back and come back. And to have the patience to let folks get to know our congregations a little bit in their own way and not decide that they're, antisocial or they're aloof or they're whatever. Or, why does she talk to herself, or why this or why that? But to just let people be for a while and just kind of decide whether they feel like divulging things. Nobody should have to say stuff right off the bat just to get in the door. We need to learn to be more relaxed around difference.
Yes, very good. Rev.
Very good. And yes, Reverend Suzanne.
Brian from our congregation sent us a question.
Brian from our congregation sent us a question.
But first, I'd like to encourage any listeners who have questions to use your raised hand question.
But first, I would like to encourage any listeners on Zoom we have to use the raise hand feature to indicate you have a question.
Webinar feature.
Yeah, it's a webinar feature.
So Brian said this topic of access
So Brian sent this on the topic of access.
is extremely connected to all things related to challenges and abilities.
He said a topic that's connected to all things related to challenges in abilities.
It's all very much connected to this spirit of the welcoming congregation.
And also it's very much connected to the spirit of a welcoming congregation.
His question is, can we as a religious body as a whole be better about making that connection?
So his question is, can we as a religious body as a whole be better about making that connection?
Yes.
Very,
It's
very good.
it's I will say I believe we are better than we were, and that we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. But part of that is this ongoing work of talking about what is ableism, what it means to discriminate in this kind of way, how this is not part of our values, it runs counter to our values, that all of the work that we do to profess that everyone has inherent worth needs to mean everyone. And that when we talk about the importance of interdependence, that we, maybe want to learn something from folks who have a lot of lived experience of interdependence, like a lot of the disabled people that I've come to know and love. So yeah, there's a lot to do. And I at least feel that it has changed. Slowly, but it is changing.
Yes, I agree. And I believe it anti-racism folks have helped lead the way.
Yes, I agree. And I believe that the anti-racism folks have helped lead the way.
We are proud that our church adopted the 8th principle
We are proud that our church adopted the 8th principle
to dismantle racism.
to dismantle racism.
And, I talked to one of the ministers in beloved conversations.
And I talked to one of the ministers in Beloved Conversations.
She pointed out that class is one of the big hurdles
And she pointed out that class is one of the big hurdles.
that connects so many issues.
And I mean, that connects so many issues.
Yeah.
So, folks, be sure to click the sign that you want to ask a question. And Dave Rogers is gonna play a little bit more as folks pick up their question.
I have a question actually.
Ian has a question.
Yeah, here, I'll try to be more in view here.
One of my main caregivers.
Yes.
Brilliant. Ian.
Well, as David says, I'm one of his main caregivers and allegedly brilliant. My name's Ian. I really like what you said about just kind of creating the general basis for being more accepting of people with invisible disabilities. But there's kind of a side question that I think maybe you have some expertise on this. So for folks with invisible disabilities, including, say, myself, I don't really call myself disabled, but I am neurodivergent very distinctly. It can be a little bit, I put this, embarrassing to divulge, even if you're not using the word of your diagnosis. It can feel embarrassing to be like, oh, this is too many people. I suddenly can't understand what anyone's saying, which happens to me a lot. Or too many people are talking to me at once, and now I literally don't know what's going on. But it feels embarrassing because it makes you feel kind of like you're like, oh, I'm just a little kid, I don't know. And it kind of puts you in that weird position. So what can those of us who all have invisible disabilities, who are neurodivergent, or have other challenges that aren't immediately obvious, do to better connect with people in our communities, whether it's church? I know I've had this issue in synagogues I've been to, in political spaces, where it feels like either you kind of have to embarrass yourself by admitting, it feels awkward. How can you overcome that awkwardness and to just state what you need in a situation or in a community?
It's not easy, is it? No. Yeah. That's part of what I mean about it's on our organizations, our congregations, our other institutions, not in the big I sense, but in the organizational sense. It's part of why it's so important for us at that level to be creating a culture of acceptance. So, it would be great if any congregation that you wanted to go to, you could look on their, you could check out their website ahead of time, and it would tell you things about the congregation that might help you, including who to talk to. It would be great if ushers and greeters and all were part of their training and part of the ethos that they bring to the work is to not ask a lot of questions beyond, how can we make this more comfortable? You're right. In so many ways, Ian, there's a kind of a pressure that arises from the inside almost to explain, and I got to explain, or I'm not going to get what I need. And that's hard to resist. But I find when I just make the ask for what I need in an unfamiliar situation, the response often tells me a lot about the place and how ready they really are for a kind of broad acceptance of me, but of other folks as well. But, finding the places where you feel comfortable enough to make the ask itself. And I'll tell you, for me, sometimes the places where it's been really low stakes have been great, because I'll just ask and I won't explain, and I'll just ask. And then, you know, it's like any kind of building up of a muscle. You know, you do it and then you do it again in another place and another time. And sooner or later, you're just doing it without having to psych yourself up, if you'll excuse the expression. And having places where you can talk about it too. Others, you know, other places where you're connected with other people who just get it. Where you can say, you know, I tried to go to this doctor, or I tried to go to this store, and it was a nightmare. And just being able to say that to somebody without having to super duper explain. Zoom has done so much of that for me. I have an audio processing disorder, among many other things, and captions are amazing for me. And I'll go to places and I'll ask, you know, can you turn on the captions? And, you know, most people, I think, still think about captions in terms of a hearing loss or being hard of hearing. Well, I'm slightly hard of hearing. I'm getting to be an old lady. But no, that's not why I need them. But I don't have to explain why I need them. I just ask for it. And they're so much more available than they used to be.
Thanks.
David, we have a few questions in the chat, and one of them is a quick question that's related to something that was just talked about, and that's please define neurodivergent as used in this webinar.
Can you please?
Reverend Suzanne, if you could please explain to us neurodiversity.
Neurodivergent.
Pardon me, neurodivergence.
I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody who lives with it, but I'll do my best. There are brains are wired differently. They're not all the same. And our society is built for certain kinds of ways that our minds work. And so when I say I'm neurodivergent, what I'm talking about is, yes, the audio processing disorder. But I'm also talking about the fact that I'm ADHD. But it also includes folks who are autistic. My husband is dyslexic. Many, many different ways that the brains are wired. And different neurologies have different ways of encountering the world that feel comfortable. Now, like I say, I am not an expert on this at all. I know some folks that I work with include other mental health diagnoses of various sorts as part of neurodivergence. I know other folks who really prefer to keep those ideas separate. And I don't have a personal knowledge to know what is the best way to go about framing that. But I will say that the kinds of lines that people draw between the plethora of mental health diagnoses and the trauma diagnoses and the learning disabilities and all feels very artificial to me.
David, there are several questions. How would you like to handle that? I know you have some questions already, so there are 3 other questions in chat.
Okay, so David Rogers can you just play one chorus from the cookie song? Because you don't have a lot of time left.
Oh, sure. Well, I'll sing it a little higher with the capo up. That'll make us a difference here.
And then we'll do some more.
This will be, yeah. Oh, I'm a little cookie. Actually, I think I'll bring it off the cookie. Try this. Oh, I'm a little cookie. Yes, I am. I was made by the cookie man. I'm away from the cookie pan. A little piece broke off of me. Now I ain't as round as I could be, but I'll taste good. Just wait and see. And I can love back just twice as hard. Better believe it. As a regular cookie can.
David Rogers.
Hey.
Main leaders in disability in Lake County.
And he's one of the main leaders in disability in Lake County.
What a treasure for our congregation.
What a treasure for our congregation.
Cat,
Thank you kindly for that,
can
David.
you get to the first questions from the audience?
Okay, can we get to the 3 questions now from the audience?
All right. The first one is, how can we help people become aware of assumption that, quote, standard base model human, end quote, is white, cis, straight, neurotypical, able-bodied, that then has to be changed as awareness of individual differences come to light? So how can we help people change that awareness?
Diving deep. Do you understand, Rev Suzanne?
Good timing. Did you understand that question, Reverend Suzanne?
Sure. Talk about it. Talk about it. Put interesting articles about it in places where people might come across them. Maybe preach about it. Maybe preach about it as part of the work that we're doing to dismantle oppression. Maybe talk about it in terms of the work that we're doing to be radically welcoming. Maybe talk about it in terms of our values and who do we want to be and how do we want to live our faith. There are so many doorways for talking about how to truly welcome and not leave people behind. Have some accessible, fun stuff. So where people can get to know people on a casual basis, where we all get to just be who we are, you know? Let the disabled leaders in your congregation shine, and not just always talking about disability, you know, but some folks who aren't identifying as disabled, you know, can also talk about disability and disability justice and inclusion, not as excluding disabled folk talking about our own experiences, but as part of, this is about we, you know? Everybody loses when we don't draw on all the talents of the people who want to be here.
Thanks. So, Kat, are there 2 more questions?
You said there were 2 more questions that we had from the chat.
Yes. let me find it. Okay, how do we, oh wait, sorry, I was reading the same one. How do we get people without disabilities to be interested in learning and accommodating those with disabilities?
Right. Good, good question.
Good question.
Our motto is access is every person's issue.
Our motto is access is every person's issue.
I was surprised in our church when some of them, oh, I can't go to your event.
I was surprised when someone from our church said, oh, I can't go to your events.
I'm not disabled.
I'm not disabled.
I feel like a white person saying, I know what the race is. I'm white.
It would be like a white person saying, I don't work on racism, I'm white.
You could.
Go ahead, Rev. Suzanne.
Some of that, I think, is about disabled folks ourselves being clear about whether we're wanting a space to be for us or we're wanting it to be a space where we're all together. Both have a place in what we do. And so sometimes it's really helpful to have a space that's just for us, where, I mean, even in any cross disability space, it's already challenging, right? Because some of us, the accommodations that one person needs are just exactly the opposite of what somebody else needs. It's hard. And yet, you know, and our experiences are widely different, partly based on, you know, our lived experience of disability and partly because of all the rest of ourselves and our experiences. So a space for us to be together is already a challenging space to make and to hold and to build community. But it is important sometimes, at least for some of us, to have those spaces where there are some things, at least, we don't have to explain. And where the assumption is that people are disabled. And sometimes it's great in those spaces if you've got the right mix of people, the right number of people, that some folks who aren't disabled are in the space because they can manage in a disabled space. But then there's a whole set of other times, right, where we're talking about issues and we're talking about changes in the broader culture of the congregation, for example, where we want the space that everybody can come into the space and listen and learn. And those spaces are super important. And sometimes it's a matter of having the energy to want to to create those spaces and those opportunities, because it can be wearying, right? So let me take a second from this question to talk about things that we have tried and are doing at the national and continental level. Because it's funny, when we arranged to do this, David, and I sent you the biography, I was talking about the Accessibility and Inclusion Ministry Program, which is a deep, intensive program for congregations to intentionally work on changing their culture around disability. And that was before we had made the decision that we are actually closing that program at the end of June. And that's a program that was developed by Equal Access and in partnership with the UUA, but it's been run for 10 years now by volunteers. And we've had 7 congregations complete the program since that includes our pilot congregations, and then the congregations that came in when we released it to the general UU population in 2015. Congregations were not ready for that kind of intensive, deep commitment. We didn't have the foundation built. And it's been a hard thing to learn and to try and, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out why isn't there more engagement? But the foundational work wasn't there. Congregations just were not seeing this as an essential part of living our values and doing our anti-oppression work. And, it's hard. I mean, this is a program I've given a chunk of my heart to now for 10 years. And it's hard to say this, but one of the things that has happened in that 10 years is that we've been doing a lot of work with the UUA talking about disability justice, talking about anti-ableism. And, you drip, 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 drip these things for a long time, all the time. And sure enough, some things start to change. And so right now we're in the process of working out arrangements and agreements between Equal Access and the UUA, where the UUA, the Association of Congregations, is going to be taking up the work of working with congregations around issues of access and inclusion, not a dedicated group of volunteers over here. And so that's in transition. It's going to take some time for them to figure out what that's going to look like, and it's going to change over time. But it's hard to say, oh, the AIM program didn't succeed, because I don't know that these changes of locating this work where it needs to be located at the Association of Congregations, I don't know that it would have happened if we hadn't had 10 years of experience with the AIM program. So yes, congregations can do things and people can get involved, and there are things about accessibility available even now on the Equal Access website for congregations that will take you can do them individually, singly, take it into your congregation to talk about. So it's not like there's no resources in this transition time, but we're in a transition time. So hopefully there'll be some interesting new resources and new ways. And we can all be part of creating things, right? I'm thinking a lot about the new technologies that we have gotten such wide acceptance of around our faith in these last couple of years, and how maybe we can have more ways for congregations to be in touch with each other for mutual support around issues, and what works, what worked here, what worked there. It's not all going to be the same, but we can do a lot, I think, with sharing of our experiences of how we got more folks in our congregations to understand the vital importance of doing this, not just because, we love so-and-so and want them to be able to stay part of our congregation, but because this is who we are.
Now, we started a little late, so go a little late.
Thanks. And now we started just a little late, so we'll go just a little late.
So, Michael, you had a second question?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Ken, are there any other questions from folks?
Yeah, we have two questions left here.
Okay,
why,
so I can't.
Go ahead.
And thank you.
why do you think visible disabilities are more easily validated and accommodated than invisible ones?
Well, for one thing, folks have been organized a lot longer, right? Some of the earliest disability rights work was done, I think, between World War I and World War II, and done by veterans with visible disabilities. And then the heyday of disability rights work in the 1970s and 80s, and then leading into the ADA in 1990, a lot of that work was done around physical barriers. Physical barriers was something that the public could be, grasp, could understand. If I can't ride the bus, I can't go to work. It was a very practical thing that, with all of those wonderful demonstrations in the late 1970s. So I really think some of it has to do with what society is aware of. And some of it has to do with people getting organized. But what we're experiencing now, I think, is that a lot more people who used to mask their disability from the world and, do their very best to present to the world as typical as possible, are saying, yeah, no, that is just not a good use of my talent and my energy, and the world needs to get over it. I think a lot of us who live with chronic illness, I've talked a lot today about my neurodivergent disability side, but living with a chronic illness is the thing that has had an enormous impact on my life. A lot of people with chronic illness in this world. And thanks to COVID, we're going to have a whole lot more of them. And so I think people will become more aware that there are a lot of things that limit people's participation in our society beyond the ones that they can see, when somebody has, an advertisement and, oh, look, here's a disabled person, and I look at that thing and I say, well, yeah, okay, so here's somebody with a rollator and there's somebody with a scooter, and look at all those other people. Odds are there's some disabled people over there too, but nobody thinks about that. I think we're changing on that as a society. I think we're getting a little bit of a clue.
I agree. And I think anti-racism has helped open doors for us all. So, Kath, you said there was one final question.
One final question. I like the captions because I also need notes to help me remember things and to focus when I take my own notes, but also I also have a reading issue as well. The lines get so blurred and are so fast about differing persons' needs, it makes it difficult to implement. What are ways you have found to implement the things you have been talking about?
Well, one of the things that I am grateful for in the way that Zoom, for example, continues to add to its capacities, is that not only does it give the scrolling captions, but you can turn on the transcript. And so you can actually go back a ways and see something if you miss something. And have it more or less in the same window so that you don't completely lose the thread of what's happening in the in the conversation part. That has been good. It certainly is not the greatest thing in the world, but you know, I mean, it makes lots of mistakes. But I remember back when I was first using speech-to-text dictation software 25 years ago, and you had to train it to your voice. This thing picks up everybody's voice. It's amazing. But it needs work. I don't have good answers for the particular thing that you're raising. I'm always experimenting and trying to accommodate things. Like one of the things that Zoom does not do, right, is give captions in a breakout room. So I feel really lucky because I use an app on my phone called Live Transcribe. It's not the reason that they developed the app. I think they developed the app for people to have conversations in the same room with each other where somebody needs a transcription of it. But I use it in a breakout room because it'll give me captions of what's going on and being said in the breakout room. I think we need to keep experimenting and trying things and asking for new technology and new things. You know, let's ask Zoom, hey, can you put this on the list of things you keep adding? And then tell each other. When you find an answer for something, tell each other. It's not a very sophisticated answer, but it's what I got.
Hey, you've done wonderful, Reverend Suzanne.
Hey, you have done wonderful, Reverend Suzanne.
And yes, it seems simple, invisible disabilities.
And yes, it seems simple, invisible
But
disabilities,
you can dive deep,
but you can dive deep.
even misdiagnosis
Even a misdiagnosis
or a non-existent disability.
or a non-existent disability,
That label can be disabling.
that label can be disabling.
So it's a really big topic.
So it is a really big
I'd
topic.
like to thank everybody who helped.
I would like to thank everybody who helped.
And you remember everybody.
I do remember everybody. Thank you, Reverend Suzanne Fast, for presenting. Thank you, Mr. Patrick Galasso, for doing ASL interpreting.
For all of our webinars, thank you, Ben.
Oh yes, Patrick has signed for all of our webinars so far. Thank you, Patrick. And then a big thank you to our own David Rogers for his amazing folk singing as always, and his guitar playing. Thank you to Michael Young and his father, Stephen Young, members of our accessibility task force who had to leave a few minutes ago. Thank you very much to Deborah Nunez, David's amazing wife, for being here to help. And thank you to Rev. Jen Young Sung Roo. She really wanted to be here on this, but because of a bit of an urgent situation came up for her, she had to take her leave. And thank you, Kat Johnson, if I'm getting your last name correct. Thank you so much for running the webinar in the background and for your technical help with everything this committee and the rest of the church does.
And I say the community, social media has expressed a lot of interest.
And I'll say that the community on social media has expressed a lot of interest.
So we're going to do a chance question. What if anyone wants to hang out? Maybe Dale play us because I can try.
So we're going to do our chalice extinguishing, but then if anyone wants to hang out, maybe Dave will play us some Diddy-Duncan Fry.
You want to hear that?
In a moment.
In a moment.
In a moment. Let me know.
The chalice extinguishing.
But first, the chalice extinguishing.
As Helen Keller said,
As Helen Keller said,
I am conscious of a soul sense
I am conscious of a soul sense
that lifts me above the narrow, cramping circumstances of my life.
that lifts me above the narrow, cramping circumstances of my life.
My physical limitations are forgotten.
My physical limitations are forgotten.
World lies upward.
My world lies upward.
The length and the breadth and the sweep of the heavens.
The length,
Mine.
the length and the breadth and the sweep of the heavens are mine.
Are
Or are ours.
Right.
Right?
Oh, by the way, voice recognition is terrible with my voice.
And by the way, voice recognition is terrible with my voice.
But yeah, everyone are welcome to stick around. David, tell us about my favorite song tonight, my favorite musician.
And by the way, if anybody knows the song, feel free to sing along.
Tell us a little about the song.
The song is a German freedom song from hundreds of years ago, as a matter of fact. There were some revolutionary movements going on in Germany, and then they suppressed them, and a lot of people were pretty unhappy about being suppressed. And the song came out later on when Nazism was overthrown in Germany, and the song was finally allowed again. Of course, the Nazis banned it. EqUUal is in frei, which just translates as thoughts are free. And other than the chorus, the rest is in English. Die Gedanken sind frei, my thoughts freely flower. Die Gedanken sind frei, my thoughts give me power. No hunter can trap them, no scholar can map them, no one can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei, no one can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure. My conscience decrease, this right I must render. My thoughts will not cater to Duke or dictator. No one can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. No one can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. And should tyrants take me and throw me in prison, my thoughts will burst free like clouds in season. How nations